Good morning. I'm Dwight Keene. I'm chair of the Kansas Corporation Commission. I'm joined this morning by fellow commissioners Susan Duffy and Andrew French. At this time, I will call to order this meeting of the Kansas Corporation Commission on this Thursday, August 18, 2022. Commissioners, the first matters for our consideration this morning are 38 items on the consent agenda. We've had an opportunity to review the orders in each one of these matters. And with that in mind, I would turn to each of you and ask if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And I'll begin first with Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I have no questions or comments.
Thank you. Commissioner French.
No questions. I move approval of the consent agenda.
I second the motion.
Then move to second, we approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. All right, moving on. We have three noticed items to consider this morning. The first of which is docket number 22-KG-SG-466-TAR. This is in the matter of the application of Kansas Gas Service, a division of Gas One, Inc., for the recovery of qualified extraordinary costs and the issuance of a financing order. We have before us this morning an order on the unanimous settlement agreement. And our presenter is our General Counsel, Brian Fedoden. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Commissioners. On March 31st, Kansas Gas Service, or KGS, filed an application for a financing order to issue securitized bonds to finance the qualified extraordinary costs incurred due to Winter Storm Uri. KGS believed that securitizing the qualified extraordinary costs will minimize the financial impact on its retail customers. On July 17th, KGS staff and CURB filed a joint motion to approve a settlement agreement. Some of the important terms of the settlement agreement include authorizing KGS to recover $328,043,946 in qualified extraordinary costs through the securitized bonds, authorizing KGS to recover $220,133 in those extraordinary costs attributable to sales service for resale class through a separate rider over 5 years, and allowing KGS to issue securitized bonds with a maturity date between 7 and 10 years, and approving KGS's securitized cost recovery rider tariff with semi-annual true-up adjustment mechanism. In his testimony in support of the settlement, staff witness Justin Grady explained that staff had independently validated the net quantifiable rate benefits to customers resulting from using securitized ratepayer-backed bonds, and that's in the amount of $35 to $46 million in net present value benefits. He opined that residential customers would see increased monthly bills of $4.87 to $6.42, depending on whether we were using a 7 or 10 year bond, versus if we were using traditional rate making and not bonds, that they would face a $9 a month increase over a 5-year period, or almost a $14 a month increase over 3 years under traditional rate making. The settlement agreement is a unanimous settlement agreement as defined by KAR 82-1-230A. Therefore, the commission applies a 3-factor test, which asks, is the agreement supported by substantial competent evidence? Will it establish just and reasonable rates? And is it in the public interest? This answer finds it satisfies all three. First, the settlement is supported by substantial competent evidence. There's substantial competent evidence showing that the issuance of securitized bonds is expected to provide net quantifiable rate benefits to customers, estimated in the range of $35 to $46 million. Staff, CURB, and KGS all testified that the settlement will establish just and reasonable rates. Again, staff witness Grady noted that residential customers would see increased bills in the range of $4.87 to $6.42 if we use securitized bonds versus approximately $9 a month or almost $14 a month if we relied on traditional rate making rather than securitization. Staff, CURB, and KGS also testified that the settlement is in the public interest. CURB agreed that the settlement will allow KGS to recover its prudently incurred costs while minimizing customer bill impacts. Thus, this order finds that the settlement agreement is supported by substantial competent evidence, results in just and reasonable rates, and is in the public interest, and approves the settlement agreement in its entirety. It also notes that there is the proposed financing order and all of its attachments will be approved and issued in a separate financing order, and that order is next on the docket. With that, I'm available for questions.
Brian, thank you for that that overview. It was detailed and it was helpful. Let's see if there are any questions. I'll turn first to Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you, Chair Keen. Brian, let me ask you, since we don't know exactly the amount that the customer will be charged, is that correct, until the bonds are actually issued? Is that correct?
Correct, because I mean, we gave a range of rate impacts based on the length of the bond, whether there'll be a 7-year or a 10-year bond. The order and the agreement gives KGS some flexibility on those, and the order goes into more detail than my presentation, but staff will have a role in overseeing it when there's a designated representative of staff who will monitor that to ensure that customers get the best treatment, the best rates possible, and the best bonds.
Right. So we will have a designated representative to ensure that the interests of Kansans are there at the table all the time throughout this next process, which is actually securing the bonds. Correct?
Correct. Yes. Yes. You said it more eloquently than I just attempted. Yes.
So after that, after the bonds are secured, when can we expect to see this on our bills?
I don't have a precise estimate of that. I don't know. I don't know if I can get that information for you, okay. But I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. All right. My comment is this. Over a year and a half has gone by since the event. I appreciate the fact that the legislature passed the securitization bill. This is an important tool in the toolbox as we look to pay our debts on Storm Uri, and it will save the customer some money. It will still be a substantial increase for a number of years. And I would just offer that the Attorney General's investigation to ensure that, or to discover if there was any nefarious activity, and the federal investigation is ongoing. I would like to thank staff and everyone who has been involved throughout this process. This has taken so much of our time and energy. But ultimately, the state of Kansas fared so much better than the state of Oklahoma or Texas in terms of human suffering and loss, and also in terms of making paying for this bill. I firmly believe that Storm Uri was not a one-off event. I think there will be other Storm Uris to follow. Bottom line is we've learned a lot from this one, and hopefully we'll be much better prepared and we'll have a better understanding of the costs involved. I mean, folks need to remember, we do not regulate the cost of gas. That is a market event. And unfortunately, it was what it was. But I support this settlement. I believe it will provide some relief to Kansas customers. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner French.
Gosh, I don't think I can can add much to what Commissioner Duffy just commented there. I think I would just reiterate and make very clear, although I think the order makes it clear, as Commissioner Duffy said, these extraordinary costs are not profits or money flowing to our utility. These are associated with the cost of procuring a wholesale unregulated commodity product. And that's a cost that unfortunately, has to be passed on to the customer. And I understand that, that description is of cold comfort to customers who do ultimately see the impact on their bill. But I think what we have done through this proceeding is we've looked at, well, where can we actually impact and minimize costs to customers? And as Commissioner Duffy said, I think we owe a big thanks to the Kansas legislature that saw the need for securitization legislation that let us take these extraordinary costs and finance them at the lowest possible level. And as the order lays out, results in tens of millions of dollars of savings compared to what customers would have to pay if we didn't have that financing option available. And then I think our agency has also done what it can to include machinery where if there is some further disgorgement of profits, if there was something untoward going on in the unregulated commodity markets, we have included machinery to flow back those funds to customers, that they wouldn't get trapped at the utility level or some other level, that we have created a mechanism for customers to receive those funds back. So, long story short, it's a very unfortunate situation, but I think our agency has basically taken every diligent effort we can under our jurisdiction to minimize the cost on customers. And I thank our staff for all the assistance they gave us in that process. That's all I have. And with that, I would move to approve the order described in this docket.
I second the motion.
Then moved and second, we approve the order in this docket. Is there any further discussion? I'll add my thoughts. I think my colleagues have pretty much covered the waterfront by way of an overview of where we are. Again, what caused this? This is the aftermath. This is the consequence of a winter storm Uri. Whether it'll happen again, it's anybody's guess, but it had cataclysmic and really some really serious consequences for all Kansans. Inconvenience and now the cost. As they've indicated, the commission has absolutely no control, really neither does the federal government, over the price of natural gas, which is the main commodity here that we're seeking to securitize at this point in terms of the financing of the costs incurred by Kansas Gas Service. Brian, let me ask just for follow on. I realize that the length of the bonds are other variables that will dictate what the savings are to Kansas ratepayers by using the securitization process. But given that range, what was the anticipated estimated minimum savings?
$35 million. So
Okay.
it's significant.
Okay. It's, no pun intended, it is cold comfort. This is mitigation. It's mitigation to prevent a worse alternative result. But it's, under the circumstances, I think, a tool the legislature provided us. We're utilizing it to the best of our ability to mitigate the cost of Kansas ratepayers and to provide them with some measure of protection at this point. That concludes my comments. Any further comments? We have a motion before us, been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The order is approved. Next up, as Mr. Bedoden indicated, is a companion docket. This is 22-KGSG-446-TAR. Again, same docket, but this time it's in the matter of the application of Kansas Gas Service, a division of One Gas Inc., for the recovery of qualified extraordinary costs and for the issuance of a financing order. Before us this morning is that financing order. Once again, we'll turn to our General Counsel, Brian Fedotin. If you would, please give us an overview, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. This is as you referenced, this is a financing order that we just approved moments ago. And this is the lengthy document that is kind of the meat of it's how they actually issue the bonds and all of that, the paperwork. It includes several appendices, including the form of issuance advice letter, the form of tariff securitized cost recovery rider, the form of the true up letter, the tariff property servicing agreement, those kinds of things. And so it's something where the bond issuers and the bankers will need to do their job. So it's not the most exciting read, but it's an essential read and for them. So with that, I'm available for questions.
Very well, let's see if there are any. I'll turn this time to first Commissioner French.
I have no questions. My understanding is as Mr. Fedotin described. I mean, this is the machinery by which the securitization can occur. This order is needed to lay the legal framework for that to happen. So my understanding is the same as described.
Thank you, Commissioner Duffy.
I have no comments and I move approval of the order.
Second.
In a second, we approve the order in this docket. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. The order is approved. Thank you very much, Brian. We appreciate your overview in both instances.
Sure. Thank you, commissioners.
The final notice item before us this morning is docket number 23-TRAN-072-PEN. This is in the matter of the investigation of Carlos E. Ramon Barzola, DBA CRB Transport of Garden City, Kansas, regarding the violations of the motor carrier safety statutes, rules, and regulations, and the Commission's authority to impose penalties, sanctions, and/or the revocation of motor carrier authority. Before us this morning is a penalty order, and our presenter this morning is Jared Smith. No, it isn't. It's Hassan Latif. My apologies.
No problem. Good morning, commissioners. The penalty order before you arises out of a compliance review of CRB Transport, a common motor carrier which hauls grain, feed, and hay, operating out of Garden City, Kansas. The commission most recently penalized this carrier on May 17th, 2015. On July 28th, the commission suspended the carrier's operating authority after special investigators Erica Pargas and Penny Fryback discovered major violations during their compliance review. And the carrier remains suspended, though they're working with staff towards compliance and have reapplied for authority. The penalty order that is before you is based on the aforementioned investigation conducted by transportation staff from July 12th to July 22nd. And during their investigation, the special investigators found several violations, and the order before you assesses penalties for 10 of those violations, resulting in $7,650 in total penalties. Just a brief summary of some of the violations. They include a $750 fine for failure to require drivers to record record of duty status. There were 25 violations of this type. There was a $1,500 enhanced fine for failure to maintain the required records of vehicle inspection, maintenance, and repair. And this was previously cited in the 2015 penalty. A $1,500 enhanced fine for allowing drivers to operate a commercial motor vehicle that did not have an annual inspection in the past year. Again, this was in the previous penalty as well. And a $1,000 enhanced fine for failing to obtain commission authority prior to operating in intrastate commerce, as well as a $1,000 fine for failing to maintain proper federal operating authority when operating in interstate commerce. The carrier had additional penalties related to not having UCR registration, driving vehicles without commercial registrations, and failing to retain supporting documents, among other issues. The staff believes that the penalty being assessed is appropriate for the violations found in the investigation and recommends approval of the order before you. Both I and staff members are available to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Hassan. A very good, outstanding overview. Let's see if there are any questions. I'll turn first to Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you. I have no questions or comments.
All right. Commissioner French.
I have no questions. I move approval of the order described by Mr. Lateef.
I second the motion.
Then moving to second that we approve the order in this docket. Is there any further discussion? I'll simply add one footnote. It was a good summary there, Hassan. I think the penalties are in order. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Once again, I must commend our field staff for their diligence and outstanding attention to detail here. I hear some names from out west repeated once again, and we are very grateful for their service to the state and to the commission. Having said that, any further questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The order is approved. Thank you, Hassan.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to turn now to an event that we always look forward to when it occurs, and this is the quarterly update on activities within the Southwest Power Pool. Our presenter here once again is our SPP Working Group Consultant and former Commissioner and Chair, Sherry Feist-Albrecht. Good morning, Sherry.
Good morning.
Well, we're going to turn the floor over to you. If you
All
wish
right.
to screen share, we'll go with that too.
All right. Can you see the presentation?
Not as yet.
Not as yet. Let me see if I can figure out what I need to do now. I guess I need to go back to Drat. Sorry.
Sherry, that's okay. If you have your presentation up, you may just need to do the share screen.
I know, but I can't find it. My presentation is hiding it. I'm trying to figure out where to
Oh.
find the share screen, get back to the Zoom part of this.
Okay, well, let me know if you want me to run it.
Why don't you go ahead and just run it, because
I
I'm
actually have it, and I'll just share it from mine if that's okay with you.
okay.
And Sherry, you just tell me when you want to.
Okay. Thank you. Okay,
Can
so
you all see it?
I gotta exit out of the slideshow now. Goodness sakes. Exit.
Yes, we can see it.
Here we go. I'm back to where I need to be. Okay.
Andrew,
so-
can we go to full screen? Can we do full screen
Oh,
behind?
Let me see.
There we go. There we go.
All right, we can, if we could,
Small.
okay, and if we just go to the next slide. I apologize. Let's see. I'm here to report on the quarterly SPP meeting. So I'll cover both the Regional State Committee meeting on July 24th and the Joint Stakeholder meeting and the Board and Members Committee meeting that was held on the 25th. Next slide, please. The RSC business meeting was a jam-packed meeting. It actually took all afternoon, which is sort of unusual. But we had, as you can see from this screen, a number of items that required a vote. So next slide, please. We took a report from the cost allocation the RSC took a report from the cost allocation working group. And the key points from that I wanted to highlight is that once every 5 years, the cost allocation working group works on the safe harbor criteria review. And the safe harbor is a rule which determines what transmission project costs are paid for by the companies that are purchasing transmission service to designate a resource, or whether it's paid by the SPP footprint. And so an aggregate study is performed and assigns the costs of the needed transmission projects to different entities purchasing that service. And depending on the circumstances, a certain amount of those costs may be base plan funded. In other words, paid for by the region. And that's the amount that is considered the safe harbor. So the COG is currently undergoing its review, and we're taking a deeper dive into it. There are 3 different criteria that an entity has to satisfy in order to be eligible for the safe harbor and to allow those costs to, some portion of those costs to be regionally funded. And we're taking a look at those criteria. Some of them were put in place in 2005, and another one was put in place in 2009 or 10. And so we're taking a hard look at those to see if they are still viable criteria. And then we'll make a recommendation to the RSC ultimately as to whether we recommend some changes. The other item that we covered was at the request of the RSC. It was a revision request for number 465 that had to do with generator self-funding that the board actually passed in April at the April meeting, but there were some concerns raised by wind developers about the self-funding and the potential impacts on retail rates. And so COG did an investigation into that rate impact concern. And ultimately, the SPP staff did an analysis of a certain number of formula rate funded projects, and ultimately concluded that the costs, it could be a cost increase, depending if you're looking at a 20-year or a 40-year time frame, and that essentially those costs were not significant. So that was just reported out. We reported out the results of the investigation to the RSC. And as I stated earlier, that revision request had been previously approved, and I assume is in the process of having tariff language developed. There was an action item that was taken at the RSC business meeting, which goes hand in hand with the planning reserve margin, which we'll talk about later. But I wanted to highlight that it isn't an action item that directed SPP to develop and present a plan to the RSC by the October meeting timeframe on a deficiency mitigation strategy for any load responsible entities unable to meet the newly approved 15% planning reserve margin. And I'll get into more detail about the planning reserve margin here in a slide or two. So next slide. One of the items, this is a kind of a standard item for RSC to consider. This is the 2023 RSC budget, which was approved. It's a bit of an increase, not significant increase really from the 2022 budget, given that this one builds in 2 in-person meetings, whereas the previous budget had, I don't believe, had funding in place for any meetings at all in person. So this accounts, some money was increased for travel and meeting expenses. The audit increase, I think, increased by $200, and otherwise everything else is pretty much the same. Nominating committee, this is a standard item for the July meeting in anticipation of election of RSC officers in October. Just thought I'd keep you abreast of who the nominating committee members are. They'll be proposing a slate of officers for election in October. Christy Fegan of South Dakota is going to chair the nominating committee, Scott Rupp of Missouri, and Ted Thomas of Arkansas. Next slide. I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on the Regional Allocation Review Task Force. This is a task force that was a condition of Perk's grant of the highway byway cost allocation methodology for SPP. And it currently requires that the Regional Allocation Review Task Force take a look at that highway byway methodology and look at those factors that go into that at least every 6 years. So RCAR 3, as we refer to that, is underway now, and RCAR is the Regional Cost Allocation Review Report. So the RARTF is in the process of developing that RCAR 3 report. This committee is composed of an equal number of Market and Operations Policy Committee members and RSC members, plus one board member. And they've been meeting at about every other month for the last, I think, since December, developing this process. And what it does is it authorizes the RSC ultimately to recommend any adjustments to the cost allocation if review shows an imbalanced cost allocation to one or more zones. It requires both the Market and Operations Policy Committee and RSC to define the analytical methods to be used during the review. And beginning in 2015, it provided a remedy process that enabled member companies to seek relief from MOPSI. And I think there are, as I recall, 5 or 6 designated or established remedies under the methodology. Next slide, please. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background because I don't know if I've really ever talked with you about this process before, but there's been 2 regional cost allocation reports that were created since 2011, both of which studied all projects approved for construction. And that's a requirement that's in the tariff related to this. So RCAR 1 and RCAR 2 both took a look at all the projects that were approved for construction. RCAR 1 had not as many projects. RCAR 2 had a few more projects. But as part of every RCAR, there's a kind of a process afterwards of lessons learned. What did we learn? What do we need to tweak? Is there anything that needs to be adjusted? Are there inequities that need to be resolved? So as part of the RCAR 2 process, it was becoming harder and harder to solve that review in terms of evaluating those impacts. And so one of the provisions in RCAR 2 was to start taking a look at it's always been a kind of a historical look back. And there was a desire to put some forward-looking elements into the methodology. And the only way that could really be done is if there was if they would eliminate the tariff requirement to study all projects approved. So FERC did allow that to happen, granted that in April of this year. So as a result, the RARTF can now recommend to MOPSI and RSC that the RCAR study just include a subset of projects approved by the SPP board. And so what they've been doing with RCAR 3 is only those projects that have been approved and placed in service for more than 2 years should be studied. So that's an example, but that's also the premise on which RCAR 3 is operating. And so next slide, please. So that study is currently underway, and it's taken that operations-based study approach, kind of that future look or inform the historical look with actual operations data. So what they've done is they've taken the daily market runs from the integrated marketplace, removed just the selected highway byway transmission upgrades in a subsequent run in an effort to capture the value that the removed transmission provides to the region. The RSC at its meeting in July reviewed the partial results of the RCAR 3 study, which does show significant benefit to cost results for the SPP region as a whole and all SPP pricing zones. the study is expected to be completed and a final recommendation made in October this year. And this decision by the RSC was to approve that recommendation to go ahead and complete the RCAR study based solely on the operational results. And Commissioner French is a member of the RARTF. I don't know if you have any color you'd like to add to this process.
Well, I don't know if now is the right time for it yet. I think like all of us, we're waiting to see the final study results, but we've started to see some preliminary results, and it's a good story for the cost benefit of what's been built in SPP. I think the big change here that's probably important to focus on is in past years, I think the approach, or past studies, the approach has been more modeling and hypotheticals to figure out what we think the cost benefits were. And the difference here is we're actually, SPP staff is taking the actual marketplace and redispatching it based on whether you have the transmission infrastructure in place or not. And so they're getting a real world picture of what the actual difference in cost is with and without the projects. And so, and I think that has tended to show pretty significant benefits to having that infrastructure in place. There are, Sherry can comment on this as well, but I would say the results are generally showing very high BC ratios. You see probably in the eastern half of the state or in the Evergy region, we're seeing things more like 5 or 6 benefit to cost ratio, which is obviously pretty high. The Western Kansas benefit to cost has actually slightly decreased a little bit, but I think it's still in the range of 3, which is the preliminary result. So still obviously higher than 1, which is kind of the threshold of what you need to see. Some of the preliminary results are a little odd for some of the areas in southeastern Kansas that we know continue to be constrained, but the results are showing pretty high benefit to cost. And so we have asked SPP staff to take a little closer look at that. A lot of the results we're seeing, they intuitively make sense. Those we thought need a little more study. So the report continues, and so I'd emphasize, the results are preliminary. We want to make sure we have good confidence in the results. But right now, I do think the approach makes a lot of sense I'm impressed that they're able to do this level of analysis, to actually remove infrastructure from our system, be able to redispatch the market, and tell you, how that comes out. I think that's, a great way to perform the analysis. And so I'm very interested to see, as we continue to develop the report, what we come out with the final report.
And I don't have anything to add to that. So
can I ask a question here?
Sure.
So the third bullet point says that the RSC approved the RARTF recommendation to complete the study based on the operational results. And one, what is the time frame? And then will you implement this?
That's a new twist. And before, and that's kind of how they've been preparing this study, but they sought RSC approval since that's a change in the methodology.
Okay, I couldn't understand why they were getting the approval to complete the study, but this doesn't talk about implementation of the process.
The final.
You froze, Sherry.
While Sherry froze, I guess I'll say I think they are already sort of implementing it and going down that path of preparing the report based on this new operational approach. But they wanted to make sure, because the RSC has oversight over cost allocation and the review of cost allocation, they wanted to make sure, SPP staff wanted to make sure that the RSC approved of sort of the process change. And so now that that's been done, I think the RARTF, that task force, can then go ahead and move forward with completing the report. And I would expect probably in the next several months, we'll have a completed report.
Okay, and the second bullet says, which shows significant benefit to cost results for SPP and all the pricing zones. So it looks like we'll get more real-time cost, which hopefully will be a more accurate but lower cost. Is that?
Yeah, Sherry,
we're
if
headed?
you want to take it, I would say, I mean, yes, one thing I think is a good piece of this study, which I kind of highlighted, is, I don't know if it's real time is the right word, but real world.
Real world.
Data. I mean, this shows, you know, how the market would function with and without the infrastructure that we've invested in. The other thing I would point out, though, is, you know, what this study tries to capture is it doesn't try to second guess our cost allocation methodology or try to say, well, here's an allocation that would be better, or here's how the benefits are shaking out in all the different zones, and maybe we should change it. What it's trying to make sure is that at least every single zone should experience a cost benefit. Now, some might have a cost benefit of, you know, 1
Right.
or 1.5. But some might have a cost benefit of 15. And so we don't take that and say, well, we're going to reshuffle how we allocate costs. This is just really it's a safety net to ensure that everybody is experiencing cost benefit under the methodology we use. And Sherry, if you have any flavor to add to that, I just wanted to make that clear.
No, that's exactly what it's designed to do. And I think that's part of the reason that FERC put that condition on it. The highway byway methodology was a new concept back in 2010, and one that FERC did approve, but did attach that additional requirement on just so that we could make sure it stands the test of time, I think.
Okay, that's good. So this is a good layer that we're going, we're going
Right.
through. Thank you.
Right.
All right.
Sure. And I think we're ready to move to the next slide. Let's see. DC ties congestion hedging. I thought I'd provide a little bit more information. This is a highly technical issue here. It's one that much of which is above my head in terms of some of the detail. But what I've done here is I've taken some excerpts from the policy paper that was drafted to explain this. But as SPP has sought to expand westward, we do have 7 DC ties that would interconnect the east to the west. And so one of the concerns that the Western entities have had is just how are auction revenue rights and how are transmission congestion rights going to be treated? And so they reached a compromise in a DC ties solution group that was put together just for the purpose of trying to get to a solution here. And so this is I'm trying to give you a little bit of background, but those DC ties are connected to alternating current facilities. And so as those paths cross those ties, they're going to be awarded auction revenue rights and transmission congestion rights, as is done today. And they determine those on a single path source to sink. And then it gets settled in multiple parts. Well, with this compromise, the settlement will be done in 2 stages, with the alternating current portion settling in the respective eastern or western interconnection. And then the day ahead market congestion rent across the tie in both stages is an option style, while the alternating current portions will remain obligations. So basically what that means is, to the extent you're a western entity or an eastern entity and you have AC portions that need to settle out, those will remain as obligations to you, but they do have the option of the day ahead market congestion piece of that. So next slide. So in the first 4 years, which is stage 1 of this compromise solution, the settlement will be removed from the transmission congestion right market. And then they'll be, those right holders will be compensated for the congestion on the DC tie and the day ahead market up to their firm service. And it's really complicated, but I wanted to give you a description here in words of what's in the policy paper. But they're trying to adjust for that reservation and against real time, the day ahead against real time markets, and just put a value on that congestion. So that's where they're going to handle settlements in the first 4 years. After that transition period, then the settlements process will revert to the existing process that is within SPP now. So they'll be compensated then for the congestion on the specific DC tie based on the awarded transmission congestion right megawatt amount. This solution is one of the last things that was a step along the way to expansion into the Western interconnection. That process, I mean, the Western entities have until April 1st of 2023, I believe, now to commit to membership in SPP. But this was one of the last hurdles that was had to be worked out. So this came before the RSC because it does involve cost allocation principles, and the RSC approved that solution. And I'm happy to entertain any questions, but I might have to say that the best person to answer some of these questions might be Chad Unrein. So I will do my best if you have a question about this process. Otherwise, I will try to work with you individually on explaining this, because some of this it's very technical, and I don't know that I fully appreciate all the nuances that the market piece of this involves, as Chad would be better able to do.
What's the date for commitment again?
I believe it's April 1st of 2023. It was originally April 1st of 2022, but because some of these issues had not been resolved, it was extended.
Okay.
And I believe in the meantime, Colorado Springs utilities have indicated their intent to participate or to join. So that's not a commitment yet, but the membership agreement part and the financial commitment will come April 1st, 2023.
So do we have several that are signing on that we already know about?
Yes, we do. I believe
Okay.
there are about 7 entities, and I'd have to go back and look at a previous slide deck. I think I might have had it in a notes section on a previous slide deck, but I'm happy to dig that out.
That's fine. I'll talk with you later about
Sure.
that. But I just wanted to know what the real interest was. I'm assuming it would be high, but maybe not. Okay.
Well, there are several entities. I want to say 6 or 7 that have expressed interest. So,
Cherry,
right.
I'll just add, I mean, you can tell me if your understanding is different, but I don't view this particular component as a headline item. I mean, this was really to recognize that there are some DC ties in place, and once they join, they will be subject to our market. And so there will be some dispatch occurring across the ties. And so you have to figure out how that compensation happens for the congestion rights across the ties. And so this is just simply a mechanism to make sure there's fair compensation. The thornier issues would be if in the future, if there are ever DC ties added, or if there are upgrades to the capacity of the existing ties, and what cost allocation might apply there if we so chose to increase our interconnection between the existing system and the Western interconnect. And those would be, obviously big issues, but that would be handled at a later date. So that's how I'm viewing sort of the significance of this versus other issues that may be out there potentially in the future. And I frankly don't know and don't expect that those would come up soon.
yeah, that's absolutely right. And I don't know how soon those might come into being. Obviously, those wouldn't become an issue till after there's a commitment made, and they might be years down the road, depending on how these ties do. if and when expansion to the west occurs and they're put in use, they'll have a better test of the capability of these DC ties.
So ultimately, this is a service that's being negotiated and offered, but it could be a precursor to, for example, Colorado joining SPP.
It could be.
Could be.
Right now, it depends on, I think of the utilities that are interested, that have expressed an interest in joining. I don't know that any of those commissions, I don't know that those utilities are regulated by those state commissions.
I understand they are not.
They are not, but to the extent others decide to join, it does open the door to additional states states being added to the RSC.
Okay, thank you.
I would add to that, though. I mean, that's certainly something that's it's a topic of casual discussion, if not more than casual discussion. And I think what I hear, at least to start, is we would probably take a conservative approach of there's an SPP East, there's an SPP West, and cost allocation may be separate across them, given that there's such a limited interconnection between the two. And any sort of merging would be a very staged conservative approach.
Thank you.
And with that, we can move to the next slide.
Forgot I was running things.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. This topic was one of a great interest and debate, not just within the RSC, but within several different working groups. But one of the issues that the RSC voted on was this performance-based accreditation. And what it does is it's a methodology to evaluate the actual performance of the generators and then accredit their capacity based on their ability to perform. So different generators are going to have different accreditations based on their ability to perform. So it impacts different entities differently. And it allocates that accreditation as according to the actual performance of the generator. And so this performance-based accreditation methodology was specifically for conventional resources, the thermal generation resources. And it values those conventional resources that are reliable and available to perform when needed most. And so it acts as incentive for underperforming resources to improve their performance. And it also ensures the appropriate capacity value to calculate for the planning reserve margin. And it assures the SPP transmission system that can capably meet the system needs. This is something, I think I've talked with you about this before, but there is an electric load carrying capability methodology that's used for renewable resources. And it's a performance-based accreditation, which SPP has had in its FERC just recently approved the tariff. There had been a revision request presented to, tariff language had been presented to FERC. There had been a deficiency letter, there had been a response back. And so that has been approved. So this has been in the works for, I think, performance-based accreditation. It certainly goes hand in hand with Winter Storm Uri, but I believe it was in the works prior to that. And it kind of puts this on an equal footing or with those renewable resources, in that it is a performance-based accreditation methodology. The previous methodology that SPP was using was just to do a 1 hour capability test during a summer peak season to see what the performance of that particular facility was. And then they based the accreditation on that and tended favored nameplate capacity rather than the actual performance capacity. So it tended to overstate the availability of the capacity on that generator. So that was part of the reason for taking a look at this. I'm trying to think. This is going to give you a better sense of what generators are available and which can be, and that better is a better measure of reliability to the system, as I said there in that last bullet on the right hand side. Next slide, please. So this is where things got a little bit, I mean, there were the performance-based accreditation itself relies on a calculation that takes into consider several different factors. And I don't think anybody really had, there are some issues with some of the individual factors, but overall, as they went through this, as this methodology went through the stakeholder process, there was really quite a bit of buy-in to the performance-based accreditation. So you can see here that SPP staff proposed implementing the accreditation beginning with data gathering in 2022 through 2023, and then phasing that in over time with 25% in 2024, 50% in 2025, 75% in 2026, and full implementation in 2027. The Supply Adequacy Working Group, the IRATF, the COG all supported both the performance-based accreditation methodology and the timeline. But the Market and Operations Policy Committee proposed an alternative timeline. They didn't necessarily disagree with the methodology, but they wanted to extend that implementation timeframe for an additional year to 2028, given an additional year for data gathering. The RSC approved that methodology, and it's fully described in this policy paper. It outlines all the components of the methodology. If anybody has a desire to have greater detail about what that methodology is, I will note though that the MMU, the Market Monitoring Unit at SPP did take issue. I don't think there's not any, the only concern that the Market Monitoring Unit has with the methodology is the methodology would require using the best 4 out of 5 years of data for the calculations and for the calculations performed in the methodology. He would favor using, they would favor using all 5 years, not kicking out 1 year. The other thing is they were very supportive of no more than a 5-year implementation timeline. So they're supportive of the timeline here that was ultimately approved by the RSC.
So the RSC approved the staff's proposal.
Right.
Okay, all right, just wanted to be clear.
Right. Yep.
Was there any thought to, I mean, I think we should be moving forward quickly on this, but is there any way that if an entity can prove their performance now, that they get some extra credit if they can provide a historic 5-year timeline? I mean, this incremental phase-in, I guess I don't really understand. What is the phase-in? The number of companies, or what? What are we phasing in?
I think it's to give some of the entities time to improve their performance, to do what they need to do to improve their performance over this time period. So if there are repairs or maintenance things that need to be done to improve the performance of their generators, that they have some opportunity to stage that in. I think that's the main reason. Part of it probably is related to the staff work involved in this. But the other part of it is 97% of the utilities or the generators in SPP are subject to NERC requirements, which requires them to provide
Right,
outage data,
right.
the GADS data. There are about 3% of the utilities in SPP that do not have to do that. They're small enough entities that they're not required to do that. So they had to come up with an alternative method for gathering data from those smaller entities. Plus, there's also a little bit of an educational curve there in terms of informing those smaller entities of this is the data that we need. Here's how you go about collecting it. And SPP staff is going to do a couple of webinar workshop type things to bring them along on this. But it's a recognition, and there are maybe some generators out there that don't have that haven't been operating for 5 years and may not have 5 years worth of data at this point in time. So it recognizes that not everybody's in the same place right now.
Okay, but what are we phasing in, Sherry? Are we?
The methodology, the accreditation practice itself.
So the accreditation will only be used on 25% of the generators, or only 25%, of your performance will be evaluated, or I'm not understanding that.
I think the idea is to I don't know.
You've frozen. All right.
Jerry's trying to hand it
Implemented.
to me.
I don't know. They've been directed to prepare tariff language on how to implement this.
Okay.
And we haven't seen that tariff language yet. So,
Okay.
and I have to go back and look at the policy paper. The policy paper itself may explain that detail. I don't
Okay.
recall.
So is that available, the policy paper?
Yes.
Okay, all
I'm
right.
happy to provide it.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Sure.
I'll stop with the questions and read the policy paper.
Oh, it's okay.
I've got a few questions and comments. I do think the phase-in is intended to, so Commissioner Duffy, this will change the accreditation of individual resources. And so I think the idea is you would only phase in a certain portion of that change in each year until you get to full implementation in 2027. I think the reason there's a phase-in is kind of, as Sherry indicated, there's some discomfort from utilities. Look, they say, look, I have this accreditation of my resources now. I'm not quite sure how my operations are going to line up and what we will be accredited with next year. Is there going to be a big swing? And so I think there is some uncertainty and wanting to make sure that they're able to shift their operations if necessary to make sure that they are able to get enough accreditation. I do want to make sure though that we separate this conversation of performance-based accreditation from the reserve margin conversation, that is separate and that is going to be implemented immediately. The other comments I would make on performance-based accreditation, and I did vote for this. I voted in favor, and I'll get to why. I share some of the market monitor's concerns about this specific methodology. I think, as Sherry mentioned, the old methodology, essentially we took the nameplate capacity at its word, and we said, this is a 200 megawatt unit. That's what we're going to be able to count on. Clearly, during Winter Storm Uri, we were taught that there were plants on outage. There were plants that just didn't perform well. We realized we cannot just count on nameplate capacity, even though a unit is quote unquote dispatchable. And so to me, that really prompted this conversation to try to understand what is the actual performance of our units. I do have some concern with, as the market monitor said, that we're only going to look at the best 4 out of 5 years, that we're going to, throw out the worst case scenario year, which probably means Winter Storm Uri gets tossed out like it didn't happen. To me, that is concerning. But I will say, I think this is a big step in the right direction. I think there are operational changes, and I do give credence to the fact that there's uncertainty for utilities that have to plan and understand what resources they have accredited. And so some phase in is warranted and some incrementalism is warranted. What this really does, and something SPP staff explained to us, is this, system-wide is not going to change the amount of accredited capacity that is within SPP. What it is going to do is it's going to identify the performance of different units, and you may see a slight rebalancing. So utilities that have units that perform better than the average unit are going to get more credit for their units. Utilities that have poorer performing units are going to have a little less credit. And so I think the really important thing that this does, which is what Sherry led off with, is it provides an incentive to have higher performing units. It's not necessarily going to slam anybody, and I don't think you're going to see wild swings in accreditation. But incrementally, it provides a pretty good incentive to make sure that you are operating your facilities in a way that makes them available when they're needed. So I think it is a really good step in the right direction.
I would agree, and I think the planning reserve and the performance-based accreditation go hand in glove. I mean, it's kind of like data for what we need to do, and I do support this completely. Yeah, Yuri highlighted our deficiencies.
All right, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, this is the planning reserve margin, and I've spent like 3 slides explaining this, and I probably have gone into more detail, but I wanted to give you a sense of where this comes from and how it works. It's SPP is a summer peaking RTO, so its planning reserve margin is based on a summer peak. So the planning reserve margin is just a measure of the capacity that's required to maintain reliability based on the summer peak. In getting to that determination, SPP does a loss of load expectation analysis to determine what that planning reserve margin ought to be. They conduct those studies every 2 years. And so the loss of load expectation is the expected number of days per year an area does not have enough capacity to meet load. So SPP uses the kind of the current industry practice of one day in 10 years as a threshold reliability target. So that's the equivalent of a 1/10 of a day per year. So they want to make sure that they can maintain reliability that meets that expectation. Right now, I guess before July 25th, the annual planning reserve margin was 12%, meaning that the load responsible entity has to have sufficient capacity to meet their summer peak load, plus to have an additional 12% capacity in reserves. But that is a requirement of that includes a financial enforcement mechanism, which is a deficiency payment, which is part of the reason, along with the vote on the performance-based accreditation. No, it's this one on, it goes along here. I'll keep going, never mind. I'll get to that in a later slide. So anyway, but the SPP doesn't put that same requirement on the winter season. It's an obligation for the load responsible entities to meet, but there's no financial enforcement mechanism that goes with it in the winter season. So next slide. So a little bit of explanation for the LOLE study. This PRM recommendation was based on the 2021 LOLE study. And they have a number of key assumptions that they put into that study. They take a look at generation outages. They looked at demand response. They had a number of considerations in there. I'm trying to think. Let's see. The study results, when they and they applied a couple of different sensitivities to this as well, trying to anticipate future needs and what might happen. They basically do kind of a 5-year forward-looking study, and they focus on year 2 and year 5, and they trying to anticipate some trends that might be coming into play. So they looked at an increase in operational events associated with scarce capacity. They looked at the growing deployment of energy limited resources. They looked at changing load shapes that are occurring due to electrification. They built all of those sensitivities into the study. And in looking at all those factors, their estimation was that the planning reserve margin could range anywhere from around 13% to as high as 18%. And I believe SPP staff has indicated that they selected 15% as being the most realistic kind of middle ground, given what capacity is on the system now. Next slide, please.
Sherry,
Yes.
if I could interject, what are energy limited resources? What is that?
Energy limited resources, when you have what happens with renewable resources, with the more solar, the more wind that you have in the system, the lower the accreditation values of those. And so they're the energy limited resources. And then storage presents its own set of issues, because some of the storage devices, some of them are standby storage, some of them are hybrid, meaning that they can be recharged and have energy provided that way too. So those are the energy limited resources that they're talking about there.
So basically solar plus storage, wind also?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the 15% PRM was pretty much, I don't think anybody really debated the need to raise the planning reserve margin. I think that the LOLE study pretty fairly represented that. There wasn't, as I recall, much disagreement about the 15%. What was the issue was the timing. Do you do it? SPP staff's recommendation was for it to go in place effective the 2023 summer season. A lot of the entities really believe that was too soon, that didn't give them enough time to plan to meet that. By SPP's calculation, I believe that there are 12 load responsible entities that, as it stands with their most recent resource adequacy workbook submission, would not meet the 15% in 2023. And so there was a desire for that to be phased in so that there would be time for those entities to get on board. So the Supply Adequacy Working Group and MOPSI favored a 13% in 2023, 14% in 2024, 15% in 2025 implementation. COG voted to kind of split the baby, so to speak, and go with 13% in 2023 and 15% in 2024. When it came to the RSC unanimously approved that recommendation for it to begin with the 2023 summer season, but also the action item that I referred to earlier, this came as kind of part and parcel of that discussion in the vote on the RSC vote. And that was to take a look at asking SPP to develop and present a plan on a deficiency mitigation strategy for entities unable to meet that 15% PRM. So SPP staff is currently working on a deficiency mitigation strategy. It's essentially what they're looking at as a waiver process. Is there a way for SPP to put in place some sort of a waiver process for that deficiency payment that would otherwise have to be paid if they don't meet the 15% PRM in 2023? So
I
that
guess
is,
I'll make a comment.
sure,
I mean, I just want to say I voted for this, and it was not a difficult decision to vote for the 15% increase. I mean, I would say SPP staff presented this as forcefully as I've ever seen them advocate for something. I mean, they normally try to facilitate a decision, but not advocate too strongly. I think this was an exception. I mean, we saw their engineering staff show great discomfort at the idea of staying at a 12% planning reserve margin heading into next season. Seeing that level of discomfort, I mean, I think all of the state regulators ultimately said, we can't in good conscience stay here. So it was an easy decision to make, but I would say it was still difficult in the sense that a lot of utilities understandably said, look, we're going to either be close or this might put us at a deficiency. We're not sure that there is enough capacity out there for us to go and acquire and to become compliant. And so, certainly understand that idea. I mean, I think there's probably a reality that not a lot of new generating capacity is going to be built, by July of next year. At the same time, I think this decision does allow some important incentives to take place. This makes sure that any capacity, dispatchable capacity, accredited capacity that we have in SPP isn't going to be sold out to another utility in another region. We're going to be able to keep it here for reliability purposes in our region. And it simply keeps the heat on everybody to go make sure they are, beating the ground, doing everything they can to make sure they have sufficient resources. It also sends a strong signal that we don't need you retiring anything in the next few months. I mean, if that was your plan, that now is not the time. So it sends some pretty important signals. I'm willing to look at this mitigation plan and potential waivers. To me, it has to be an extreme case where the utility shows that they have taken every possible good faith effort to acquire generating capacity or to improve what they have, and they simply just can't get there. I think those would be the only circumstances under which I think it should be considered. If they haven't undertaken those good faith steps and done everything they can to improve their standing, if they were cutting it really close on planning reserve margin, holding something like 12%, and they're not able to get up to 15, and they haven't shown good faith efforts, we have methods in place to handle that, and that it's a deficiency payment, which just essentially it reflects that, okay, if you're below the planning reserve margin, you are then relying on other load serving entities, other utilities throughout the region who might have excess to help meet your energy demands. And there's a payment, there's a calculation for how that payment is calculated, but essentially for those that find themselves under the 15%, and there may be a couple small entities in Kansas, if they find themselves being subsidized by others, I mean, I am ultimately, I would ultimately say that payment is probably proper to compensate those that chose to act a little more conservatively and carry some excess capacity. So it remains to be seen what the deficiency mitigation strategy would be. That's still being developed, as I understand, by SPP staff. And then I believe that will come to the RSC and perhaps other stakeholder groups and certainly the board of directors at our next quarterly meetings. So, I think we did ultimately get a unanimous vote of the RSC for the 15%. And I think that's a reflection that all the commissioners feel the exact same way, that reliability is job number one. And we weren't going to take any chances. Once we got the news from the engineering and planning staff at SPP, that anything below 15% is a risk they weren't willing to stomach, I think the decision was made for us at the same time. Sherry, do we still have you?
All right, are we ready to go to the next slide?
We are. I just finished my comments.
Okay. I keep experiencing some freezing, and so I'm not ever really sure if we're frozen or not. Okay, so then the joint stakeholder brief, which would normally have occurred on Monday afternoon, was shifted to Tuesday morning, the day of the board meeting. This is just a rundown of their agenda items. And I would say I'll try to go through some of these as we go through. Let's go to next slide. And then the board, this reflects the SPP Board of Directors and Members Committee meeting and the votes there. This just reflects that the board and members committee also approved what the RSC approved in terms of the performance-based accreditation, in terms of the planning reserve margin, and directed SPP staff to prepare revision requests to implement both of those policies. The other item that I didn't devote any additional slide to, I think I had discussed it perhaps in the April set of slides, but there was an ITP, a 2021 ITP request for further evaluation of Crossroads to Phantom 345 kV double circuit project. And they came up, there was kind of, after they did that reevaluation, SPS is the entity that's affected by this. They had a proposal for a Crossroads to Hobbs to Roadrunner double circuit 345 kV project. I think it was a little bit more cost effective. The Hobbs is I think a substation in between, so it sort of divides, it provides a crossing point there for the transmission lines running through.
Where are we talking about, Sherry?
It's in southeast New Mexico.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, northwest Texas, kind of that panhandle area. And so that one was one that was also approved after that restudy. And then this is the list of the consent agenda items. The DC tie proposal that we talked about earlier was, the board did vote on that one as well. They did adopt the revision request for when RSC made revision to its bylaws, it impacted the SPP bylaws as they're related to the RSC composition, and the board accepted that revision of their SPP bylaws. And then there were some transmission projects that came out of the transmission working group, and then I believe there was a reevaluation request that was also considered in those consent agenda items. Next slide. Perk update. As you know, the transmission planning and cost allocation rulemaking is underway. Comments were due yesterday. Reply comments are due September 19th. There's also a notice of proposed rulemaking involved in for the generation interconnection processes and agreements. Those initial comments are due October 13th, with reply comments due on the 14th of November. Next slide. Hit C2. FERC did issue a deficiency letter to SPP on July 28th, requesting further clarification and giving 30 days in which to respond. So that response letter is due to FERC on August 29th, I believe. I know that SPP staff is working with Sunflower to develop some response to those deficiencies. I think it's just trying to make that a pretty ironclad waiver process. I don't anticipate too much difficulty with that going forward, but that's where that one stands. And then Order 2222, FERC recently issued a deficiency letter to SPP on August 12th. It's like a 33-page deficiency letter, so they've raised a number of issues in a number of areas, and they request further explanation from SPP on a variety of issues. They've got 30 days in which to respond. This has not been unusual. I believe to date, all of the other RTOs that have submitted compliance filings for Order 2222 have received deficiency letters of some sort. And next slide. IRATF is, its work is ongoing. As work gets completed on initiatives, we take them off the list. Right now, we're working on winterization plans. Staff sent out a survey to utilities for their winterization plans. Those are due August 31st. Once SPP receives them, they'll take a look at the plans, try to create some sort of a best industry practice type standard, I think, is what their plan is. And then that'll come before IRATF at some point. Currently working on SAUGUS, they're working on a winter season PRM, planning reserve margin. We're working on fuel supply criteria. There's a planning criteria that we're taking a look at that deals with fuel supply, might necessitate some changes there. And then we're also reviewing the reliability attributes, among many other initiatives, but that work is ongoing and we just keep churning through the list. So I think this is the last slide, is the Consolidated Planning Process Task Force. And they've been in kind of an educational phase, but they're moving beyond that now, taking a look at exploring futures development for planning processes, taking a look at ways to share costs, some different models for mechanisms for that. And I don't know I know they had a meeting yesterday. I was sort of in and out of it. I'm not sure if there's anything that you'd like to add, Commissioner French?
No, I mean, I think your characterization is correct, that we're starting to move a little beyond education and starting to flesh some things out. We took some straw proposals in our last meeting for SPP staff to gauge which areas maybe they should be focusing on next. I know, not to get too in the weeds, but as one of the central issues is going to be, as you consolidate your planning processes, you've got to develop new cost sharing mechanisms. So, for example, right now, we would plan new transmission to serve load through the integrated transmission plan, but we might build some upgrades, as say a generator wants to come online and interconnect. That's a separate process where you identify upgrades and you directly assign them to that generator. Well, if you consolidate those processes and say you build one investment that solves both of those needs, the needs of load and the need of some generators to interconnect, you've got to figure out, it might be a more optimal solution that has lower cost, but then you've got to figure out how that cost is split out. And so that's something we're starting to dig into, what does that model look like? And so definitely, I think we're a ways out from any decisions at all, but we're starting to ask SPP to flesh out what our different cost allocation options might look like. And obviously a particular concern to me is what guardrails are there to make sure that that ultimately customers are paying, are getting a good deal. Let's leave it that way. But I would also say, this task force is going to look at cost allocation, but ultimately that's a long road, because any mechanism that touches cost allocation or changes how we do it is going to have to go through the full regional state committee at the end of the day. So this is an introductory phase of an effort that's probably going to take several years. So that's where we stand now. Thanks, Sherry.
That's my last
All right. I've stopped sharing, I think.
meeting.
You're still there? Still there, Sharon?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I was going to bring you up, that was my last slide, but I was going to bring you up to date a little bit on SEAMS activity. There was a joint targeted interconnection queue meeting at the end of June. One of the most interesting things to come out of that meeting was that as part of this JTIQ process, I think it's been very successful, but there's a proposal that's coming out of that process that in lieu of the previous or the current affected system studies that each RTO has performed in the past to develop projects along the seam, they are they're planning to make some tariff changes to implement the JTIQ study process and do it every 2 years. So that's a proposal that they're working on. It'll require tariff language changes, I think, both within MISO and within SPP. But I read that as a very positive outcome from this whole JTIQ process, and it's caused them to take a look at ways to streamline some of those processes, eliminate some studies. So, and then the next SEAMS Liaison Committee meeting and the next JTIQ meeting are both on Monday. Other SEAMS projects that are underway that were part of the SEAMS Liaison kind of list of things.
We lost you, Sharon. Sherry?
That's all I have on SEAMS. I didn't get it into a slide, but I wanted to at least bring you up to date on what's going on.
Well, you came back. Are you still there?
Was I not, could you not hear me at all?
We had to be somewhat clairvoyant on a couple of sentences.
Oh,
but,
I'm sorry.
I think generally we got the drift. Andrew's saying, Sherry, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, I have a couple of overview questions if I can ask you. And we appreciate so much this liaison function that you perform for us, and you do so admirably. These reports are really important. I think I'll say, especially for myself, I suspect for Susan as well, since we don't have the steady diet of the SPP. Still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I have granddaughter here, so.
Okay. Well,
She just arrived, and so she's not understanding what's happening.
She can join if she wishes. The point I'm getting at is this, kind of basically, the frequency of the RSC meetings is what? Either Zoom or in person. Is this monthly?
Meetings?
Yes.
The RSC meets every month in an educational session, but the primary business meeting is quarterly. The cost allocation working group meets every month. Most of the SPP working groups meet on a monthly basis.
Okay. The question here's I'm going back to the last time we were together. At that time, I was concerned that we somehow kind of gen up a little bit the information flow so that we could all the commissioners could become familiar with some of the events better in advance, or at least contemporaneously with when they occurred. And toward that end, I think we had kind of settled on a process by which we're going to do these quarterly things, and that if circumstances dictated, we could have something with greater frequency. But this seems to work pretty well. So again, back to the RSC. How long after the meeting actually occurs are the minutes available?
Oh,
Ballpark.
on the business meeting, I'm trying to see, let me think. I'm trying to see, let me look to see real quick if I downloaded them. I don't know if I have, I think it's usually within a week. but let me double check real quick. So let's see. Okay. Let's see.
Andrew, you can jump in.
I
here if you
do
want.
have the minutes. I do have the minutes. They came out on August the 7th.
Okay.
So
Okay.
when was the meeting?
And I can certainly
So
forward to the,
I'll
Sure.
jump in. I'm just looking on the SPP website. It looks like for the July 25th meeting, they were posted on the SPP website on the 29th. So 4
Okay.
days after.
yeah, that's
Sure, sure.
probably when I downloaded them was on the August 7th. So.
Yeah. Sure, let me kind of cut to the chase here. What I'm wondering is, can we regularize the
Chair Keen, we can't
minutes to all
understand
commissioners?
you. Chair Keen, we can't understand what you're saying. It's garbled.
Can you understand me now?
Yes.
Really? Wonderful.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Your video's
Yeah,
not,
off and
working,
on.
but that's okay. All right.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, let me do this. Let me take the video down. Does that help? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Might have reduced my bandwidth requirement here a little bit. Okay, thanks, Andrew. What I'm getting at is this. I don't want to put Andrew in any kind of compromising situation with respect to coma, but I'm wondering, Sherry, could you help us regularize maybe the receipt of these minutes by all commissioner members so we can kind of see what's going on? It gives us the advantage really to review, I think, with more granularity in kind of real time, not only the action that was on the agenda, but I believe that frequently there's going to be attachments to the minutes that we could review. For example, again, it's just one of these communication deals. It was only most recently that I saw the initial comments that the RSC had filed on the FERC transmission ANOPR back in October of last year. So, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out some way by which we can become kind of better informed in real time. That's the reason for this inquiry. Sherry?
I think the better option would be for me to send you the RSC agenda and attachments for the meeting, which usually comes out a week in advance of the RSC meeting. That way you'll have it ahead of the actual meeting and you can see what the issues are.
You anticipated my next question. That was it. If we could see that, and then after the fact, Sherry, could you maybe, and if I'm piling on here, you tell me, but could you kind of be our conduit to read the receipt of the minutes after the fact? If you heard me.
If we lost
yes,
Sherry,
I can do both.
Okay, perfect. I think that'll improve the flow of information a lot. I appreciate that. That was the totality of my questions.
And Chair Keen, I get where you're coming from, and I think this would be good. I mean, before we weren't getting updates, now we are quarterly, but there's so much activity that directly affects what we do here. And it's not good for us to be unaware or not have any understanding of the multiple issues. And so this might help us to be better aware of the issues, like you said, in real time. And I mean, Commissioner French is our representative, but it's not helpful if we don't understand what's going on, because they have a lot to do with the entities we regulate. I mean, it's all hand in glove now. And so it's our responsibility as commissioners to be aware of the activity that is going on, so we can work with knowledge. Thank you, Sherry, for taking on.
Well stated. Are there any further questions for Sherry?
I'm happy to do anything you need information wise. I'm happy to provide.
Thank you so much. Well, Sherry, thank you again. Outstanding presentation, as usual. Very helpful for us, and we're so grateful for your service to the commission. Well, commissioners, I turn to you. If there's no further questions of Sherry or no further matters that you wish to come before the commission, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Aye. Take care. All right. Before we vanish involuntarily.